Hey, welcome to the Juku Work Podcast. Today we're talking to Nishika de Rosairo. Nishika is the founder and CEO of HumanQ, the world's technology-driven pioneer of group coaching. At HumanQ, Nishika helps leaders discover their organization's human potential, accelerating the transformation of digital mindsets for individuals, organizations, and societies. She was a strategic advisor to Fortune 500 companies, including Apple, for more than 15 years and has traveled around the world to dozens of countries. And she and her team is on a mission to unlock human potential globally. Nishika, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Raul. Excited to be here.
There's a few things that I think are important as we lead companies or we lead people within companies. Had an interesting conversation with different founders at different levels, small companies, large companies, different focuses, B2B, B2C. It all does boil down to how we perceive our team and how our team perceives themselves and their environment and the work that they do. I think those are the key frameworks. But I know that you also have a leadership framework called HumanQ. I'd love to, first of all, outline what does that mean, HumanQ, and get your ideas of like how you develop this framework and what does that mean in actuality.
Great. Yeah, thank you for asking. So, the way we think about human Q is in terms of really enabling someone to unlock their full potential, Raul, which means
Mm.
that an individual is capable of so much. We have unlimited potential. We have the ability to achieve things far beyond our own imagination and even far beyond our own self belief. So, what Human Q as a framework is about is how do we unlock someone's ability to be their best, most fulfilled self while unlocking left and right brain thinking. If you think about education systems, they are designed to help us be stronger as left brain candidates or right brain candidates. But we're talking about like really unlocking both sides in the spectrum of the brain to really bring in the creative juices, the linear juices, the strategic thinking, all of that under kind of one human brain, if you will, in order to allow someone to live their best life, both personally and in their career as well.
No, I love that. We'll dive into the model defining it and kind of getting more granular. I do though, if you can bear with me for my ignorance here, but I do want to propose an idea that I would love to get your thoughts on. That is the premise correct that there are people that either is it true that we are left and right brain thinkers and some people behave as that, or is it because we think that we're more right or left brain thinkers that we behave like, oh, I'm more creative, therefore I must be this kind of thinker? Or is it actually true when it comes to how you're formed and how you're designed, you might lean towards one more than the other? I'd like to dive into that because that's a core premise to the work that you do.
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's like the question of are leaders born or made, right?
Mm,
Similar in some sense of the word.
true.
I would say that most folks have a natural inclination towards one side of the brain. It's
Mm,
probably based on how they were raised or just interests they've had from a young age and so on. And then when we get into kind of formal education systems, we have to pick. Do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be a scientist? Do I want to be an artist? Do I want to be a piano player, right? A musician? And those are very different parts of the brain. But I have a fundamental belief, which is that just because you might have an inclination
mhm.
toward one side of the brain doesn't mean that you can't cultivate and activate the other side of the brain. And it's sort of like saying, well, I learned how to swim in my 50s or something like that, something you never did before. So the potential is there. It's a matter of understanding kind of what those gaps are, if any, and whether you're interested in closing them, or maybe you don't even know, but someone else identifies it in you and says, you would be amazing at playing the piano. And you're like, really? And then you dive into that, right? So there's definitely something there around being able to cultivate and tap into skills that you didn't know you had or sides of the brain you didn't know you really had as a gift or they weren't fully activated to begin with.
And I think that's the key thing too, is to challenge what you personally believe that you can do. And so I'd love to dive into what does the framework look like, or how do you work with teams or with individuals to extract this framework and help us go through this. Either we can do it live or how you think about the entire framework
Yeah.
applied.
The way we designed the framework is really based on years of work we did in corporate America and also at universities. And what we found out fundamentally was that there were these really large buckets, so areas that organizations were very keen on, either actually not even either, but developing and tracking and monitoring. And so
Mm,
we took these large umbrellas, having done a bunch of focus groups with people based in different industries and different levels and across functions and across geographies as well. And it basically resulted in what we call 14 success skills. These success skills are really the notions that drive what we would call a fully activated human. So the more you can develop these success skills, the better. And then we break them up into left brain thinking, which is what we call visionary intelligence, and then right brain thinking, which is what we call emotional and social intelligence. So when we work with organizations, because we're B2B fundamentally,
mhm,
they will select the success skills related to VQ or ESQ, actually both, that
mhm.
they're most interested in developing and tracking and understanding ROI on. And then that's what we anchor our products around.
I do want to define because you just to make sure that it's clear. When you say VQ, that's visionary, and then SQ is emotional and social. Can you define? Because this is the first time that I've heard. We hear EQ all the time. This is the first time I've heard visionary intelligence and emotional and social intelligence. Can you help us define how we arrive to that and how, so that we can self-reflect in our daily work? How does this play into our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I love these questions, by the way. So great. So, visionary intelligence is really this notion of strategic thinking, massive action, creating experiences that count. So, we've taken these kind of big buckets that fall under strategy, execution, linear thinking, visionary, work, etc., and extracted it into these 7 success skills that sit under what we call VQ. So
Mhm,
this idea being that, when you have a vision, that's great, but you need to be able to see that all the way through to execution, right? Through a linear kind of pattern of thinking and obviously project managing whatever that vision is through to execution and scale and alignment. When we think about ESQ, the right hand side of the brain, I mean, emotional intelligence as a concept has been around for such a long time. And I think the notion of social intelligence, we've been kind of playing with it maybe for the last 7, 8 years. But it's really the combination of the two, Raul, that starts to get really interesting, right? Because emotional intelligence without an understanding of how people in their social environments and how they read cues and how they bring in sensory acuity and stuff isn't quite it's not the same without kind of coupling them both together, because then you're looking at the whole ecosystem of what it takes to really read those cues beyond your environment. For this is like
mhm.
when you're having communication, we call it dialogue, two-way dialogue. That's a success skill, right? We have resilience in here as well, self-awareness. So all these things that allow you to really accelerate your external environment, if you will, in terms of reading those cues, understanding emotional factors and so on, and then accelerating progress.
That's fascinating, and we'll probably dive into those success factors. But I heard a reflection recently that I thought was it's obvious, but it's also really cool to think about it in a different way. That society keeps us personally sane because of those cues that you're mentioning of the self awareness. It's part of it, right? The self awareness and the dialogue and the sensory acuity, and also what is a social good based on being interacting and talking to other people. When you get granular at that point, it seems quite simple, but it's so powerful in my opinion to be able to understand the different dynamics. And when we when you dive into this with as you work obviously with other teams and B2B relationships or in consulting or advisory, how do we once we have the awareness, how do individuals improve? Is it a core competencies on the success characteristics which we can list out, or is it based on the 2 VQ or an ESQ? Like how do we optimize?
Yeah. So the way we think about it is, so first and foremost, our products are all group related products. So
Hmm,
we have this fundamental belief that the power of learning and development is augmented and heightened and accelerated even further when groups of people come together to learn. So there's
hmm,
an aspect of self development, there's an aspect of augmented learning where you learn from each other, not only from the perspective of, oh, someone implemented a best practice that I want to borrow, but also from the perspective of not feeling alone, because often we think that the things we don't know, only we don't know, and that's not true. Or the
Mhm.
things that we struggle with that only we struggle with, which is also not true. So this whole augmentation of the group, very small, intimate groups of 6 individuals, and we do this at scale. So we can take like 4,000 employees and break them all up into groups of 6.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When we work with these groups, these success skills become kind of part of the design of the entire product in how we design it, customize it, deliver it, and then how we measure and track it. So from an individual's perspective, they understand the success skills that they're going to be measured on, but they're not necessarily thinking about it day to day in terms of, strategic impact. How do I do that per se? It's all of the things that happen in between in these group coaching sessions that ask them questions related to strategic impact or get them to think about strategic impact in a different way that starts to move the needle forward. So we don't get them fixated on the success skills. We instead get them to really focus on the journey and what happens in the flow of work. And then our coaches who deliver these products, basically, they're the ones who focus on the success skills. And then we, of course, structure the
Mm.
whole program such that we can anchor and measure around them.
I love that. So it's comprehensive, it's long term, it's intimate, it's social, but then it's also you do it at scale. I kind of want to flip the conversation if it's okay and talk a little bit on the business front because to give you some perspective, I was on another podcast with an individual. We were talking about positioning B2B services, pricing, etc. And one of the things that for me at least the way that I've approached the market and helping the teams grow is always you need to position it as either a dollar saved or a dollar gained. For every dollar that they give you, it's like X amount is saved or X amount is gained. And if you do it that way, it's a no brainer for the business to think about decision making in terms of the sale. I'm really fascinated that you have an actual like ROI calculator. And I would love to know how I know ROI when it comes to the teams. It's clear to me, but I'd love to know how you paint the picture around the importance of having our teams, like as a stakeholder in the company, having our teams understand CQ, ESQ applied through the education and the training and the coaching that you do, but applied through their daily work. How do we measure impact on that? And I'd love to know how you've developed a model to measure that kind of impact because it seems very intangible.
Yeah, and ROI has always fascinated me, Raul, simply because I come from a background of having worked in the human capital and HR space for a really long time. And as you know, with a lot of these programs, you don't get to measure ROI in the same way that you can measure ROI with a finance program or a technology project or whatever, right? So that people will call it the fluffy thing, right? And because there is no a way of really
But it's
gathering,
the thing.
but it's the most important thing. So it's the
Your
most important
people.
fluffy thing. And for me, it was a huge pain point working in organizations where there was just no ability to measure what got done. I still remember being at all these companies. I worked at Deloitte, at Salesforce, at Cisco, and several others. And my clients internally would say, we sent 200 people to training. What happened? And we wouldn't be able to tell them what happened. We'd say,
Yeah.
the instructor was great. The classroom was airy. The food was organic. And people seemed to like it, right? Like my clients are like, what? Are my people more productive? And we're like, we think so, but we don't know. So it was such a pain point. So when I started and founded EI, I knew that there were two things that I was really solving for. One of them was really around how do we develop people at scale in a way that creates sustained behavioral change. So not
Mhm.
training one-time event, but more around sustainability so that people actually change their behaviors over time. And then the second thing that I knew that I was really focused on that was a pain point was how do we measure the success of a product like this? And how do you measure it from multiple angles? So we started measuring it actually from a 360-degree angle, where we take into account the individual and their readiness. Are they more ready to take action? Because that's critical. If you went through a program role and you came out on the other side saying, I don't feel ready to take action, then you can't take action. We want to know, are you more ready? And then we also check with the manager whether the person did take action. So there's another component of, okay, they said they were ready, great, but did they take action? And then the third component of it is proficiency, which is really around had they changed the way they think and how they would approach situations relative to those VQ and ESQ success skills that the company selected.
I think that's important too, because information is great, but it's useless without actually implementing it. So being able to measure that too and measure the impact or the competency of that action. That's pretty fascinating to be able to come up with a model that way, to be able to measure this intangible piece. Because, in my opinion, even just looking at it personally, any kind of information that I ingest or that I invest in should return. It's probably the highest returns on my personal investment. Like north, it's quite significant. So it's odd sometimes as businesses to think about if we're doing this kind of training, how do we make sure that our team consumes it and then it changes behavior, like in an ideal North Star goal. And the it's not just a one-time behavior, it's a continual improvement. And I'm fascinated to hear because you've have such a rich experience that saw your previous work history too of growing this. What need did you really see in the marketplace, and how did you carve out this space? That's because this is unique and different. How did you carve that out in the beginning? And what are some of the key lessons that you learned personally as a founder? Because it's cool to have where you are right now, but it's also fascinating to know about the origin.
Yeah, I would say it all stemmed from pain points, personal pain points, having been the buyer in some of these companies that I mentioned, and also the business partner to leaders who wanted solutions like this. And then I would also say, Raul, that organizations for the longest time have grappled with the human element. It's been decades and we still don't know how to unlock the potential of individuals. Like we do the same things over and over again, send them to classroom training, do sexual harassment training, unconscious bias training. And we think all these things create a culture of diversity and inclusion or
Mhm.
help people become managers by sending them to that one time manager training the moment they become a manager, right? Like we just haven't gotten past these practices that are so archaic. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying that these practices shouldn't exist. I think as a foundation, they're great because you've got to start somewhere, but it's not the be all and the end all, and it's not the one time fix. So when I kind of look at this landscape, for me, I was looking at the landscape from the standpoint of like, how do we take these incredible programs that companies have that solve something in a moment in time, but then we sustain it for long term momentum.
Mhm.
And we are really that long term momentum piece, right? Around driving the sustainability and so on. So, really, my founder story is coming out of pain points that I saw day in and day out in corporate America mostly. I have also worked with universities in New Zealand and other places for a long time. So I've also, so really coming from students and above, 18 years
Mhm.
old and older, all the way to the C-suite, having been an executive coach, and I still am to CEOs. So this whole range of the 18-year-old to the 60-something-year-old CEO or the 20-something-year-old CEO nowadays. What do these people grapple with? What are their biggest pain points? And how can you do it in a way that actually solves the problem? And not just solves the problem, but solves it in a way that's super high impact, very low overhead, super resourceful in terms of us being an extension of the team, carrying the weight for you, white glove service, all of that. So I think for us, like our starting point was the fact that we had a very robust way of going to market. Even though we've only been around for 3.5 years,
Mhm.
just the robustness of how we go to market. And we're really there to solve big problems and to help leaders with their top 5 priorities. Like we are not a nice to have solution. We are the business critical solution that's going to help you drive your 5 priorities faster and with much greater impact. So that was really the genesis behind why we do what we do. And there was a gap, jumped in, filled it, and COVID hit, which was perfect for us because we were a digital company from day one. So for the folks who are like, we want our people to fly together and have group coaching together, they were calling us a year later because of COVID. So COVID has been an environment that was designed for the work we do, actually.
Mhm.
And so we've been very fortunate to be able to ride that wave.
Yeah, I was about to ask you too. With everything remote work, I think it's accelerated the need for this specifically because I have conversations with leaders, executive leaders, et cetera, and they're like, How do you do remote work? How do you lead the team this way, and how do you do these things asynchronously? And why should we not meet all the time? And it's just stuff like that, where it is the human component, but then also having the empathy for the teams that are driving the chain, all the stress they're going through, the actual things that they're being impacted by changes. So it's quite fascinating, and thank you for sharing because that's the real impact. I love how you mentioned it's not just a service, it's not just the training that it's like a tag on. It's a must-have strategic partner, and I think that is the key differentiator for this. This is fascinating to me personally. I'll probably have more questions after, but for our audience listening today, where can they go to, one, thank you for being on the podcast today, and two, learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah. Www.humanq.com is our website. They could also email me, nishika@humanq.com. I'm happy to answer any and all questions, but really, I think conversations around people and the needs they have and how to really optimize fulfillment, impact, engagement, all of those things in the workplace it's at the heart of every business today. And so those are the conversations we love having. So if anyone out there wants to have them with us, we are totally willing and available.
Oh, wonderful. I'll put those links in the show notes. Nishika, it's an honor and pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raul.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.